Hi there, I'm Andreas Marazis, and I'm the host of the ENC In-Depth podcast. Today's in-depth discussion is dedicated to the recently published ENC analysis mapping Russia's influence in the Kyrgyz Republic by Dr. Aijan Sharshenova. The debate is part of the ENC In-Depth podcast discussions with experts and academics assessing the developments in Central Asia in the fields of security, foreign policy, economy, democracy, and education. And let me introduce my virtual companion for today's podcast discussion, who is no one else other than the author of this excellent ENC analysis. Dr. Aijan Sharshenova is an associate research fellow at the OSCE Academy in Bishkek and an academic council member with the ENC. Before joining the OSCE Academy, Dr. Sharshenova has worked at the UN and UNDP country offices in the Middle East and international development projects in Kyrgyzstan. Her research interests include democratization and democracy promotion, post-Soviet authoritarianism, and international development. Aijan, welcome to the ENC Depth podcast.
Hello, thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you to the European Neighborhood Council. I'm really pleased to be here with you and to talk through my recently published with you, but previously published with the OSCE Academy policy paper. Thank you.
The pleasure is all ours, Aijan, for having you here. Thanks a lot for taking the time to discuss your paper with us. Now, in your paper, which has been originally published, as you correctly mentioned, by the OSCE Academy in Bishkek, you map how Russia intentionally and unintentionally influences Kyrgyz politics, economy, society, and culture, and explore what challenges this influence might pose for Kyrgyz government if it is left unchecked and unaddressed, as well as you provide recommendations on how Kyrgyz policymakers could address these challenges. So let me start by asking you first, where is this dependence stemming from?
Thank you, Andreas. I think the question is very multi-layered, so to say. First of all, it's definitely history, because as you might know, the Kyrgyz Republic has been a part of the Tsarist Russian Empire back in the 18th, 19th century. In the 20th century, it has been a part of the Soviet Union. And so you can imagine, it's 150 years, if not more, of close cooperation, coexistence, collaboration, very strong linkages between the two countries. And obviously, the balance of power has always been in favor of Russia in a way, given the Russia's size, Russian history, the sheer might of Russia. So in a way, Kyrgyzstan was a colony for the Russian Empire, was a big part of the Soviet Union. And all these years of historical interconnectedness have created this dependence. And it's million subtle ways of how Kyrgyz Republic is connected to Russia, starting from like the plugs that we use in Kyrgyzstan to the standard width of the road that we use in Kyrgyzstan, to the way the textbooks are written, the way the country is divided into territorial and administrative units. So the dependence is so deeply rooted, it literally is everywhere. Every single thing, any part of social life, economic life, of governance, culture, you look at, you see deep connections between the Russian Federation or the Russian state and the Kyrgyz Republic. But more recently, in the last 30 years, the dependence is stemming also from socio-economic factors, because due to a variety of reasons, the Kyrgyz Republic has not been able to provide sufficient employment opportunities for its citizens or a decent level of life for Kyrgyz citizens within the country. So as you might know, many of our compatriots have to travel to near abroad, mostly to Russia. Up to 95% of our labor migrants abroad are choosing Russia as their primary destination, and they're sending money back. So in a way, about 10 to 15% of Kyrgyz citizens are actually residing and working in Russia and sending the money back to support their families and indirectly supporting the economy of Kyrgyzstan. So these are like two key points of dependence: the historical past and the past dependence of the Kyrgyz Republic, dependence on Russia, and the current socioeconomic conditions in the country.
Was there a point at some, at some stage throughout its its 30 years of independence path, that Kyrgyzstan was less dependent on Russia?
Well, this is a really tough one because it's very difficult to pinpoint periods of time when the Kyrgyz Republic has been less dependent on Russia, because it's quite difficult to measure the dependence. Again, it's a million of small things which we probably do not see and do not always analyze while living our daily lives. But I believe in the first immediate decade after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so roughly 1991 to the beginning of 2000s, we probably had a bit of a window of opportunity. And it applies to everything, both in terms of domestic development and development of building an independent, stable, and democratic state. But we also had a window of opportunity of diversifying our foreign policy choices, which unfortunately we did not do too well due to various circumstances, very deeply rooted systemic reasons. It has always been easier to find an easy fix with the Russian state, whether it's donor assistance from the Russian state, or it's employment opportunities for Kyrgyz citizens, or even like copy-pasting legislation. It's just easier to find the Russian version of anything and translate it to Kyrgyz policymaking. And I'm afraid that it's just years and years of a less than competent governance potentially in the Kyrgyz Republic has led to a point where we simply copy paste what Russia does and how Russia handles its internal issues to apply to the Kyrgyz Republic. So the window was there in the very beginning of independence, maybe the first 10 to 15 years. I think now this window is diminished.
Can I just have a follow-up question? Because you mentioned something interesting. You mentioned that it's always fairly easier, to copy-paste laws, that are available in the Russian state or government, and are easier to replicate in Kyrgyzstan. Okay, maybe easier administratively speaking, but how easily are perceived? How are perceived actually by the Kyrgyz population? This is a different story probably, but how does the population reacts towards this kind of replication of laws?
Thanks for your question. I think I cannot speak on behalf of the whole population, but my impression is that the majority of Kyrgyz citizens are too busy surviving, and they probably not pay very close attention to what the political elites do or the nitty-gritty details of what exactly they do. The small expert communities who actually follow the developments in the legislative field and policy making and general oversight of the Kyrgyz government's activities, it's quite difficult to fool them in a way, because nowadays everything is open access. You can easily run every single text through various plagiarism checkers and figure out exactly to what percentage has been plagiarized or copy-pasted from the Russian legislation, who was the actual author, whether it's a Russian MP or a Russian lawyer. So it's quite easy for the expert community to be quite transparent about that and to bring this to light. And this is something that the Kyrgyz political elites need to be aware of. And I think they're more aware of that, because maybe about 10 years ago, you would see like literally 70, 90% copy paste from the Russian Federation bills or Russian Federation strategies. Nowadays, they are more subtle. So they adjust things, they publish a copy paste that is more plagiarism proof. But if you do like a proper deeper analysis, you can see lots of things which have been copy pasted from the Russian legislation or from the Russian policy making. And it is an easy fix, because first it's a language issue, because it's easier to find something in Russian and there is no need to translate, because Russian remains the official language or the state or language, the official language of interethnic communication, as the constitution says. Secondly, it's a similar reality. As I said, like everything from the width of roads to textbooks to administrative management is coming from the same source. It's been established in the Soviet Union. It is very similar to what's in Russia, in Belarus, in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and so on and so forth. So in a way, the structures are there, so it's easier to apply policies when the structures are similar. But on another hand, it's not a particularly smart move, because The Kyrgyz authorities occasionally attempt to build the notorious vertical of power, Putin style, without the Russian resources or Putin's 20-year legacy in power, which is not particularly smart. And I'm afraid that this is a repetitive thing that's happening to every single president since the independence. And very often it doesn't lead them to particularly good results.
Thank you very much, Aijan. You mentioned briefly before, like one of the reasons why Kyrgyzstan is quite dependent in Russia, and you highlighted the dependence due to labor migrants working in Russia, sending back remittances in Kyrgyzstan, and so on, supporting their families. Are there any other key areas that you have identified in which Kyrgyzstan is heavily dependent on Russia, other than labor migration?
Certainly. Well, labor migration is the most obvious one because there are no official numbers, and numbers usually vary from source to source. The most recent, most reliable number I could find was from the IOM, International Organization of Migration, and that's from 2017. And they mentioned that 700,000 Kyrgyz citizens are working in Russia. And that's more than 10% of population, which is quite a lot. Again, economically, we're very much dependent. 70% plus of the overall trade of Kyrgyz Republic is with Russia. We are also dependent in terms of security provision and military provision. Russia often supports the Kyrgyz military and security services, both with training and technical equipment. But there is also very strong and very difficult to trace dependence of political elites on the approval from Moscow. If you follow Kyrgyz news closely, you will see that before every single presidential elections or parliamentary elections, the presidential hopefuls will usually travel to Kremlin. And they would do their best to meet with someone high up in the hierarchy of the Russian politics and take a picture with them, shake hands, and use that in their campaigns. And I think this is a very strong message to the domestic audience at home who are going to vote for that person, that I am important, I am seen in Russia, our strategic partner, and I am worthy of your vote. And I think this is quite remarkable. This is not something that you see in every single country in the former Soviet Union. And in addition to that, again, it's very difficult to trace, but within the political scientists, like experts community in Bishkek, there are rumors that every single campaign, every single political party usually hires a Russian PR strategist or political technologist or other experts to help them build the campaigns. And you actually can see a lot of similarities between the campaigns as well of Единая Россия, the pro-government Russian party, the majority party of the parliament currently, and the political parties in Kyrgyzstan. And last year during the parliamentary elections, you could even see, just like with the copy-paste of different bills, legal bills, you could see the copy-paste of the campaigns. And at some point, one of the political parties copy-pasted the manifesto without even changing Russia to the Kyrgyz Republic. It was quickly spotted by social media users and removed. But it just shows how much political elites are still dependent on Russian political technologies, on Russian influence, on Russian approval. And every time something interesting or important happens in Kyrgyzstan, we usually have a visit by Dmitry Kozak, who is deputy head of President Putin's administration. And it's usually not particularly official. It's not very well covered in the news. He comes to Bishkek, he meets with people, whoever, they discuss whatever, but that's remarkable. That's usually a sign that something important is happening. And he traveled literally like last week or in the past 10 days. There are rumors that that's in the run to the upcoming parliamentary elections this autumn.
If I may add, I wouldn't say that, especially with regards to what you mentioned about the campaigns, the PR people that they're hiring from Russia, I wouldn't say that it's dependency. I would say that it's kind of a smart move in the sense that if it works in Russia, then definitely or most likely will work out in Kyrgyzstan pretty well for the political elites who are following the same path that it was used by XYZ political figure in Russia, I guess. So it's like replicating the same moves, the same campaigns, hiring the same PR people who have been successful in in another country, and they can potentially be successful in their country.
It could be so, but also it comes from a deeper reasoning too, because, for example, I got education back in Bishkek in the Kyrgyz Russian Slavic University, and the textbooks we used to be trained as political scientists were produced in Russia. So in a way, everything I know about political science comes from the Russian authors of the Russian textbooks. And I think this is the dependence that is quite difficult to trace, and that I'm trying to just touch upon in my paper, because it's quite difficult to show the complexity and the actual roots of how everything is interconnected in the contemporary Kyrgyzstan and tied to the dependence on Russia in so many ways in a small paper. I believe like you could write a whole book about this issue that will be crossing anthropology and colonial, post-colonial, decolonial studies and mere history and archaeology and all of it. So it's a lot of things which are touched upon in the paper, but it's way more. It's just a tip of an iceberg of how much the Kyrgyz Republic is dependent. When I published my paper originally, I got a feedback from a lot of my colleagues, and the most popular feedback was like, obviously, like this is such a simple thing. And I'm like, it is a simple thing, but we need to unpack it and talk why is it so simple and taken for granted. And I only touched upon that. And I'm hoping there will be more publications to unpack this relationship without the emotions, because very often there are emotions involved, because it's difficult to distance yourself from your identity as a Kyrgyz person or a Russian person, difficult to step back from backgrounds and look at the relationship of two countries without the prism of your position or personal position.
Now, being closely tied and being so dependent with Moscow, does provide any sort of security guarantees to Bishkek during periods of uncertainty and turmoil, for example, like the quite recent border clashes with Tajikistan or unrest in Afghanistan, etc.?
Well, one would think that it should, given that Kyrgyzstan is one of the biggest, well, not biggest, I would say one of the most loyal allies of Russia in the former Soviet Union. Kyrgyzstan is part of the Eurasian Economic Union, of the CSTO, of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of like CIS. So it's quite active in supporting all Russia's regional initiatives in terms of integration and increased cooperation, including security cooperation. However, we have not seen that yet. So as you know, during the conflict on the Kyrgyz-Tajik border back in May, Russia did not talk much. The official position did not give away much. The official assistance did not go particularly either way. So in a way, my impression is that Russia does not invest heavily into its support of Central Asia when it does not concern Russia's immediate interest or direct interest in the region. It sort of leaves us to sort it out ourselves without involving Russia too much. They might be giving hints, and maybe that is something that we can read between the lines, but we certainly do not see too much help. And this is something that Kyrgyzstan has been fairly explicit about, because as you might know, back in 2010, when we had the interethnic clashes in the south of Kyrgyzstan, the Kyrgyz authorities requested assistance from Russia. Different politicians have been calling for help as well during the May events this year. Afghanistan issue is happening right now, and Kyrgyzstan is concerned about the developments in the region. And I'm sure there are discussions about Russia's support too, and what the joint position should be on the matter. But then again, we don't see too much in terms of security provision. So I feel like we are getting along with like bare minimum of support in terms of security and military support, but why? That's a big question. And I believe Russia just prefers not to engage too much or not to invest too much into these affairs.
Now, while our discussion, evolved, I was thinking of like asking you if there is a way to retain control and to have a more balanced, let's say, relationship with Russia. But while we're discussing, I think that I would change the question and I would ask you: is there actually political will to change the balance between like Moscow and Bishkek in terms of the relationship? Is the political will to have less dependency? That's the question for me.
That's a good one. Political will from the Kyrgyz side or the Russian side?
From the Kyrgyz side.
Yeah.
Because you came up with some recommendations, but in the end of the, and I would like you to mention a few of them. But in the end of the day, from your personal opinion and from what you have seen from your personal experience there, do you believe that there is political will from the current political status quo in the country, or even from previous governments?
This is a good question. The problem is that the political elites currently in power have not become or gained their position in power through solid or stable or conventional route, so to say. So for them, it's quite difficult to have any bargaining power in terms of negotiating with strategic partners, including Russia. Given the difficult socioeconomic situation as well, as you might know, things have been even worse given the global pandemic, given the reduction in economic activities, reduction in labor migrant remittances back to Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan finds itself even in a more difficult position to negotiate any sort of balance within these relationships now than it had a few years ago. I don't think there is too much political power involved, because I feel that the resources of the contemporary current political elites in the country are mostly directed, if not exclusively directed, towards domestic struggles, so domestic political competition, political negotiations between different oligarchical groups, between different political parties, and basically they're trying to build a more stable hold of power as we speak. There is not much will or resources left to negotiate the foreign policy issues at this stage, and this is quite concerning because we are losing even more windows of opportunities, we're losing our negotiation powers, and we're becoming a burden as well. Like if I was the Russian state, I would look at the Kyrgyzstan as a partner and ask like myself, why do we need Kyrgyzstan as a partner? Does it actually bring anything to the partnership apart from the labor migrants? So it's quite difficult to negotiate or bring any sort of balance when you have a partner like this that is not stable, that is focused on domestic issues, that does not have a long-term engagement strategy with its strategic partners, including Russia. So in this way, it's quite challenging to say that there is political will. I don't think there is much political will, at least like at the moment.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Aijan. I think that with that, I will conclude today's podcast. And for those who are interested in finding out more about more information about your paper, they can easily find it and download it on our website at www.encancel.org. I'm Andreas Marazis, and that was the ENC Depth Podcast.